Hello, and thanks for joining us for the Friends of the Farm lecture series. Each session is designed to deliver a small and in-depth dose of cannabis education. My name is Candace Hawes, and I want to thank all of our viewers and customers for joining us from the pharmacy, the pottery, and the Natural Healing Center, as well as all of our friends for joining us from around the world. Please make sure to hit subscribe to get notified when we post future cannabis content. Today, we're going to explore how concussions impact brain function and long-term health, and how cannabis is emerging as a potential treatment. Our guest today is Nurse Megan, who will share insights on how cannabinoids like CBD and THC, and she'll talk about real-life case studies and how the latest research on cannabis has neuroprotective benefits. This topic is especially dear to me. Here at Pharmacy Santa Ana, we proudly host a traumatic brain injury support group, and I've seen firsthand how the benefits that cannabis can provide to veterans, stroke victims, people that have suffered violent crime, and other sufferers of brain and head trauma that they've received from cannabis. So I'm really happy to have her here to talk about this and to share with others. I know a lot of you guys are familiar with Nurse Megan. She has a bachelor's in science and nursing. She's an RN. She's done a lot of education and a lot of sharing across the country and a lot across the world. She was talking just earlier about, she was on a webinar earlier today, and then she was like listening to another doctor who was presenting. So she's very, very active. She's the revolutionary force behind the Trusted Cannabis Nurse, or the Canna Nurse. Trusted Canna Nurse is her company's name. She recognized the gap in the healthcare industry, and she set out to bridge the divide between patients in the world of cannabis and CBD. She has over 12 years of experience in diverse fields of oncology, labor and delivery, hospice care, which is very important. She brings this unique perspective to her practice. She holds a national certification in 3 nursing specialties and holds a Master of Science degree in medical cannabis therapeutics, which is very exciting. Beyond her qualifications, Megan is a respected voice in the field, having spoken at numerous events and has earned various accolades. She's also an active member of notable organizations such as the Society of Cannabis Clinicians and the Cannabis Nurses Network, 2 great organizations, and also serves on an advisory board of the CanMed and Pacific College of Health and Science. In addition to cannabis education, Trusted Canna Nurse also offers a full line of high-quality products and microdosing programs. So please check out their website to learn more about that, which is really cool. Thank you so much for being with us today, Megan.
Thank you for having me. I am so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited for you to be here too. And like I said, I have a lot of experience with people that have dealt with concussions, that have, had brain injuries in the past, and I've, read a little bit about in the past in other countries, that have found benefits. So I'm really excited to have you on and to learn more about this. So thank you so much. And I have friends that are friends with you, and I've heard so much about you. And so I'm really excited to work with you for the first time. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. All right. Before we get into this, we're gonna go over some of the science. I'm gonna kind of dig in a little bit deep into the science, but in a way that hopefully you guys can understand enough to make a decision for yourself. And we definitely need more research. The research we have on cannabis and concussions is severely lacking. It's like there are just such few studies on it, but there is more research being done, and at the end, we're gonna, if that person is still on, we're gonna invite her to talk about her concussion research, because she's doing the NFL concussion research in real time right now, which is really, it's so exciting. Yeah, it's amazing. Okay, so let's get in. Oops, I already messed it up. Good job. Okay, like Candace said, just a little bit about us. We are a team of medical professionals, nurses, and a pharmacist, and we empower people to heal with both cannabis and psychedelics. And we help people all the way from beginners, just learning how to use cannabis and find the right dose and the right regimen, to the other end of the spectrum, and those with problematic use and want to cut their use or reevaluate their relationship with the plant. We help people with chronic illness and cancer, pediatrics and adults. We have an amazing pediatric care nurse who has taken care of thousands of children with autism, cancer, and epilepsy. And then microdosing programs for those interested in learning how to microdose psilocybin. Liz is here, yay. I'm gonna have to like close that down, otherwise it's gonna be like squirrel during this thing. Microdosing programs for those interested in microdosing psilocybin and learning how to do it the right way and the most effective way, and then a full line of therapeutic hemp products. Okay, before we get into the science of it, I'm going to share a story of my 8-year-old son who suffered a concussion earlier this year, and just the timeline of what happened to him and what we did and the outcome with him. So he was, an 8-year-old boy. He's very active, and he was standing on this 4-foot wall near our house and playing soccer, and managed to fall off the wall and face plant onto the concrete. This happened on a Sunday. And then this photo on the left here was taken just later that day. He had a huge goose egg that it took a couple of days for that to go down. And then he had all of the symptoms. He had a massive headache. He had fatigue. He just wanted to sleep all the time, but yet his sleep was disturbed. He would wake up in the middle of the night, and then he had some confusion. He's 8 years old, and he knows, he's a smart kid, and he couldn't count how many fingers I was holding up. And that's kind of scary for a parent when your kid should know how to do that and he couldn't do that. So he had confusion. So what we did was we started him on this formulation, this whole plant CBD oil. This is the concentration of it that I have listed here. So there's CBD, there's CBG, there's CBDA, there's CBGA, and then there's a small amount of naturally occurring THC in this. And what we did was we gave this about 3/4 of a dropper, because that's what fits inside a size 0 capsule is what we had. We gave that to him 4 times a day. And that's about 300 milligrams of total cannabinoids that he was getting per day. And then we slowly wean that down as his symptoms resolved. So, and throw in there, 2 days later, he also fell and hit his head on the grass. And if you know anything about concussions, it's that second hit before the first one heals that can be catastrophic. So we took him to the hospital. We made sure he didn't have a brain bleed, but we continued his CBD. And then by the following Monday, he was symptom free, no symptoms, no headache, no fatigue, no sleep disturbance or confusion or anything like that. And then he was back playing soccer by Wednesday, and then back out on the game field, which is really, really cool because concussions usually take a lot longer to heal. And he would ask for his CBD, saying it makes my brain feel like normal. And we're going to go into the science of why that is. So this is my 8-year-old son's story. And then this story is also in Fat Nugs magazine if you want to dig in deeper there also. Okay, before we get into the science, potential consequences of head injuries. Probably don't need to remind you guys of this, but they can be detrimental. There's a 24% increased risk of developing dementia. We see sensory motor dysfunctions. We see psychiatric disorders. Everybody knows that CTE is a possibility. That's what we're seeing in the NFL players who did not, there was no concussion protocol a decade or 2 ago. They just went back out. And then those are the NFL players that we're seeing with CTE, which is kind of a severe form of dementia. And there currently are no FDA-approved pharmaceuticals for concussions and concussion recovery. So it's really important that we have medicine to help us along the way and help our brains heal. So let's get into what happens in the brain when there's actually an impact. And I'm going to keep this as simple as possible. So we were kind of taught that a concussion happens when the head hits the skull, right? Skull hits something and then the head hits the skull and there's bruising there, right? That's not actually what's happening in the brain. So we have the gray matter and the white matter in the brain, and those are 2 different densities. It's like having one part of your brain is jello and the other part is pudding. And when those are in motion, they're going to stop at different speeds. So when they stop at different speeds, they kind of do this. And what that results in is stretching and shearing of the neurons between them. So if you think of the neurons like a silicone straw with a bunch of tiny holes poked in it, and you stretch that out and the holes open, If this happens, to a million neurons in the brain, what that does is it causes all of these electrons to flood into the neuron, and then it causes that neuron to fire. And then times that by a million, and you have all of this excess firing of the neurons at that time just after impact. So that's why people are seeing stars right after impact. And that's where like the dizziness and the blacking out comes from.
That
So
makes
that's
a lot of sense.
right, right. So that's like phase one, the initial impact, which is called the excitatory phase. And then we go into phase two, called spreading depolarization. Here's some science and chemistry for you. So when the neurons fire, they're releasing glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter. And then what happens is all of this calcium gets inside the cell, and the calcium is like this globule. It's kind of like this sticky molecule, and that gets, this is very simplified, obviously, and that sticks to the mitochondria. And then the mitochondria is the powerhouse, the energy house of the cell, right? So that can't produce the energy that it needs to produce. And you times that by a million neurons that we have in our brain, and there's this energy mismatch. There's this energy that's needed, but there's this energy that can't be produced because of this calcium influx that's preventing the mitochondria from producing its energy. And it typically takes about 2 to 4 weeks for it to balance out. And during that time, with that energy mismatch, we see nausea, headache, the brain fog, the fatigue, the sleep disturbance, all of those concussion symptoms.
Yep.
Now, to officially be diagnosed with a concussion, all you officially need is an impact, the source of impact, and one of their like 23 symptoms that include all of the things listed here. So if you hit your head and then you have one of these things, you meet the criteria for a concussion. And of course, some are going to heal faster than others, depending on the state of your brain and the degree of the impact. So that's what happens in the brain on initial impact. Then following that, we see this release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And cytokines are protein molecules in the brain, and they give direction in our brain and tell the brain what to do. And the pro-inflammatory cytokines, TNF alpha, IL-6, and IL-1B. There are, a dozen or 2 dozen, there are a lot of them, but these are pro-inflammatory cytokines that I want you guys to just keep an eye on. We also see an accumulation of lactate because of that energy mismatch. We see an increase in oxidative stress and free radicals. And free radicals are these tiny little, unhomed electrons that bounce around in the brain, causing neuronal damage. We also see impaired cerebral blood flow and cerebral edema and swelling. And then the psychological piece of this is huge for both children and adults, the anxiety, the depression, and the isolation that comes from it. They're in school, the kids are in school, but they can't think straight. And, maybe it's hard to see the board, or, the things aren't firing in their brain like they usually do. And especially over a long period of time, it can be major psychological issues. And then neck injuries too. Most concussions come with a side of a neck injury. And then because the neck is injured, that like throws off our perception. And then that throws everything else off in addition to what's going on in the brain. So a lot of things happen. But let's get into the role of inflammation in the brain. So, we think of inflammation as like a bad thing. We always want to be bringing down our inflammation. But low level inflammation is actually like our brains and bodies working the way that they are supposed to. And low level of inflammation, this thing is really small. I don't know if it's as small for you as it is for me, but it's really good for immune surveillance and neuroplasticity and repairment. So we want this low level of inflammation in our brain. That's like our brain doing its baseline job, right? However, high inflammation and inflammation over a long period of time can be detrimental. And that's where we see, the TBIs, and that's where we see neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and dementia. And then we also see, let's see here, aging. And if you look at the neuroinflammatory cytokines listed here, you see the TNF alpha, the IL-6, the IL-1. So these
Oh,
same
yeah.
ones that are elevated in a concussion and a TBI. So low levels are good. High levels over a long period of time are no bueno. And then these are like the same cytokines that we see with TBIs, dementia, and even long COVID are elevated, which is why we see cannabis work for some people who have long COVID.
Mhm.
Okay, let's look at the therapeutic potential of cannabinoids. So this is mostly petri dish and rodent studies that we have. We know based on those studies that CBD, CBG, and the combo of CBD and THC can suppress those same inflammatory cytokines, the TNF alpha, the IL-1B, and the IL-6. This is shown in mice, but not THC by itself, which is really interesting. Also acting as antioxidants, these gobble up those free radicals and those free molecules that are bouncing around in the brain, wreaking havoc. And all of these cannabinoids listed here act as antioxidants. CBD and CBG can help to regulate the cerebral blood flow and enhance neurogenesis, meaning the rebuilding of our neurons that are damaged on impact. And then I just have psilocybin here because psilocybin is also showing benefit in suppressing these inflammatory cytokines and helping with neurogenesis, as well as a lot of the symptoms of concussions too.
Interesting.
Right. Okay. This is the weight of evidence that we have to support cannabinoids for either increasing or decreasing either pro or anti-inflammatory cytokines. So let me orient you to this graph a little bit. So the up and down, the ones up at the top are the pro-inflammatory cytokines. The ones down at the bottom are the anti-inflammatory cytokines. We have both of those. And then the scale left to right is whether or not they were decreased or increased. And red is CBD, green is CBG, the gold is THC, and gray is the combination of those two. And the size of the circle just means the weight of the evidence that we have. So how much research we have to support whether it increases or decreases those cytokines. So you see the red is CBD. We have so much evidence showing that CBD decreases our pro-inflammatory cytokines. Again, the TNF alpha, the IL-6, and the IL-1B. CBD, we have a lot of evidence showing that CBD does a fantastic job at that. We have some evidence showing that the combo of CBD and CBG decrease those pro-inflammatory cytokines, or CBD and THC, and CBG does as well. Interestingly, we see that THC by itself actually increases those pro-inflammatory cytokines. And I have seen this in the real world, that I have people coming to me saying, hey, I'm taking cannabis for pain and it's not working. And it turns out they're only taking THC, or, they're taking THC distillate or isolate, and they're still having pain. And I'm like, maybe we need to add in some CBD and CBG, or a full spectrum product.
Yeah, some therapeutic cannabinoids.
Absolutely. And CBD is so neuroprotective. So anybody with a head injury should definitely be considering CBD based on the research that we have.
Yeah, it's definitely a different experience taking one isolated cannabinoid versus taking a full spectrum product. I can say from my days back and taking like trying Marinol, just to see what it was like. That experience, is very unpleasant, taking that isolated THC synthetic cannabinoid versus taking a natural combination full spectrum experience with all the natural occurring cannabinoids together. They all benefit and complement each other, versus one synthetic by itself is it's completely different experience. Right, and it can almost make the pain enhanced and
it can enhance the pain.
Yes.
So
whatever you're actually trying to treat can make it worse. So
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, we can get into 2 human research studies that I was able to find. This first one is really interesting. What they did is they took, I think it was like 20 young, healthy soccer players. Half of them were reported being cannabis users, and the other half were not cannabis users. And what they did was they induced this subconcussive state by hitting the soccer ball 20 times. And yeah, you can induce subconcussions by hitting the soccer ball. And what they found, well, first of all, what they measured was something called the near point convergence. So that's when if you hold your finger out here and you move it closer to your face, at the point where it splits into 2 images is this distance that they're measuring. And with a concussion, this distance increases. And what they found was that, within the first, 2 hours, everybody's distance went up the same. But then the cannabis users, their distance leveled out and kind of stayed the same. The non-cannabis users, their distance increased over the next, I believe that's 72 hours. And what that is, that's a measure of our ocular motor function. So the neurons in there continued to worsen for the non-cannabis users, and then they leveled out for the cannabis users. They also measured something called astrocyte activation, which is a measure of our neuroinflammation, kind of the inflammatory cytokines. The non-cannabis users went up and kept going up, and then the non-cannabis users, they started low and went down a little bit, and then they stayed kind of at baseline. So based on this study, it looks like cannabis users kind of have a leg up in concussion recovery, which is really cool. But then that begs the question, should all athletes or everybody be using CBD prophylactically? How young do we go? I kind of go back and forth about giving my 8-year-old CBD. Does he need it? Should I be giving it prophylactically? If he doesn't have any other issues going on, but he plays soccer. And at what age do we start giving it regularly? Yeah. So I do grapple with that a lot. And if anybody has any, any experience they want to share, I'm definitely open to hearing it. This other study, what they found was that cannabis use was associated with lower symptom severity 3 weeks post-injury. And that's probably because cannabis helps suppress the neuroinflammation that causes all of those symptoms. So again, we have a leg up in recovery. Okay, and here is just some mouse research that I was able to find. And what they found was that they induced a TBI in these poor mice. They gave them CBD, and what they found was that it significantly improved their memory, their learning, and their thinking skills. It reduced the tau proteins and amyloid plaques. These are the things that build up in dementia, is the proteins and the plaques, and it reduced those. It sped up the clearance of these other substances in the brain through the lymph system, and it boosted blood flow. Remember that concussions impair blood flow to the brain. They found that in the mice, it helped improve that blood flow. And then it did all these other wonderful things that are a little bit beyond my level of understanding, but did good things for the brains in the mice. And then Gilbert Brown. So this is a former NFL player, Super Bowl champion that we work with to formulate the Thrive formulation that I gave my son. So he is 53. He played in the NFL in the 90s and early 2000s. He played a total of 125 games, 15 playoffs, 2 Super Bowls, and he won the 1997 Super Bowl. And then he was put in the Green Bay Packer Hall of Fame in 2008. So I met Gilbert on a podcast just about a year ago. And, he's been off the field for 20 years, but he still has chronic pain and brain fog. And what we did was we sent him 2 of our formulations that were high in CBD and CBG and a couple of the acids in there. And I gave him instructions on how to use it. And it was about 10 days of consistent use. And he started seeing improvements in his brain function, less brain fog, more mobility. He was able to put his shoes on and tie his shoes. He drives from Michigan to Wisconsin for the games, and his legs used to swell up, and they're not swelling up anymore. So then we kind of put those formulations together. We added some CBDA, changed up the terpene profile, and came up with Thrive and Thrive XL that has all of these cannabinoids. And this is kind of our intensive, we can't call it, our intensive recovery formulation. We don't want to use medical terms, of course, but this is what we are recommending for people who are recovering from head injuries because it's heavy in CBD and CBDA and CBG and CBGA, plus some good terpenes in there.
Amazing.
Yeah. So conclusion, we need a ton more research. I'm going to let Liz talk about the research with the NFL. CBD is a potent neuroprotective molecule, and it looks like CBD is outperforming THC in head injury recovery. And of course, everybody needs access to quality medicine. Okay, and then with that, I love to have Liz is here. She's one of the researchers doing the NFL research. The NFL gave or is putting $1 million towards CBD and concussion research. And Liz is up in Canada doing one of those, or doing a lot of that research. So I want her to talk about the outcomes that she's measuring, because it's really cool. And I don't know how to get her unmuted or whatever.
Yeah, so I unlocked your microphone, Liz. Thank you so much for being with us. You'll be our first guest that I've allowed to join us by microphone. Do you see on the screen a function where you can opt in to join us via voice? There you go.
Oh, yeah. Did it work?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yay. You can hear
I don't know
me?
if you're camera ready, but I could also give you permission to do that too, or we could just leave you by voice.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm sitting here in my pajamas, but I'm not shy. You can activate me. It doesn't matter. But
okay, here we go.
A gargoyle sitting here in my living room. No, I'm not sure if it's even on. Oh, wait a minute. Okay.
And this is just amazing. Thank you so much for doing all the work that you're doing with the NFL. Those gentlemen, those players, and what they go through, even just in practice, is they're putting their bodies through a lot, and they should be taking this, like you were talking about, prophylactively, to protect their brains and bodies, and then after any kind of injury. So please tell us about what you're doing, and thank you for joining.
Yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, great job, Meg. You did awesome.
Yes, you did amazing,
really good
Megan.
Presentation. Yeah, it was so good. So thanks for having me on. I'm so excited that this webinar was even happening, because we're super just trying to really get the word out about how important cannabinoids can really be for concussion. But so what we're studying is a lot of the metrics that Meg was talking about in her presentation is what we're actually looking at in athletes. And so we're doing a clinical trial, and that is the one that's sponsored by the NFL, because they are actually interested in the metrics too, which is very encouraging that they're actually looking at this for the reasons of actually progressing the science and using it potentially as a treatment, as an agent, and to allow their players to use it. They have to change their policies, and in order to change their policies, they need the data. And so that's where we come in. And so in order to be able to do that, we have to run through a complete clinical trial. So the first part that we started, and we just finished the first portion, which was a dose escalation study. So we need to find what is the optimal dose for an athletic population to use, because what we have for cannabinoids right now, all of the data that we have in humans is not for an athletic population, it's for a clinical population. So we have epileptics, so we have everything, but we don't have athletic population data. So we started with that, and the metrics that we're looking at span all of the things that she was talking about. So we're looking at the bioinflammatory markers, so all of the TNF alpha, NF kappa B, the IL-6, IL-10. So we're drawing that out of the athletes, and we're actually looking at, so in the dose escalation study, we were looking at, do those change as we increase the dose of the cannabinoids that we're giving to them as we're calculating the optimal dose. But the second thing that is really pertinent to concussion is we're looking at transcranial Doppler information to look at the changes in the cerebral vascular blood flow. So how we can change and increase the diameter of the blood flow in the brain so that we can bring nutrients back to the critical, it's metabolic crisis is what a concussion is. So the brain can't use glucose as fast as it needs to, like Meg was saying. And so it's essentially a metabolic freak out. And so if you can expand the diameter and get the blood flowing in there, that you can bring oxygen and nutrients back to where it's needed. So we're using transcranial Doppler to study that. And then we're also using infrared to look at the oxygen concentration. So we can actually see how much oxygen is concentrated in that blood volume. So we're looking at the actual velocity of the blood, but also the concentration of the oxygen. And then we're looking at the oscillations in the brain, because we know that the separate areas of the brain, how information transfers in your brain has a lot to do with oscillation, and it's all about the electrons. So it's essentially, the action potentials in your brain are electric. And once they tag the vesicles where the neurotransmitters are sitting, that's how the signal becomes chemical. So you're electric before you're chemical. And so when that's moving through your brain, we know that the separate areas of your brain can transfer information faster than any chemical could be possible. And the only way that oscillation can happen that fast is electrical. And we know that cannabinoids have a massive effect on ion channels, and it has a lot to do with the electricity in your brain. So it's pretty exciting to know that there's levers in there that we can access with cannabinoid molecules. And I think for athletes, because there is no pharmacological agent right now for concussions, and we've worked in athletics for 30 years. And when we see the downstream effect of the neurodegenerative disorders, we know that they're triggered way back in time. And so, the contact sport athletes die of neurodegenerative disorders 3 times faster than non-contact people. And so we know that something's going on there, and it has a lot to do with the ability for the astrocytes to bring the energy to the neurons, which Meg mentioned, like the astrocyte neuron energy transfer. But there's also in your brain is the microglia, and the microglia are the resident immune cells of your brain. And those get triggered and it doesn't even have to be a physical contact. It can be triggered by long COVID or even vaccination. A lot of people were having trouble after vaccinations, and even children have trouble with it sometimes. But when your microglia go pro-inflammatory, they actually switch into, when they're normally just patrolling your brain, like before you get conked in the head, the microglia are just patrolling your neurons to make sure they have the energy that they need. And as soon as they're triggered and something sets them off, which the reactive oxygen species of that slam in the head, they turn pro-inflammatory. When they do that, they start throwing more pro-inflammatory cytokines and chemokines. But the other thing that happens is they upregulate the CB2 receptor. And when we can agonize the CB2 receptor as it's upregulating, we can do that with cannabinoids. We can hit the CB2 receptors and we can flip the microglia back into an anti-inflammatory state. And they actually flip back into the morphology and the function of an anti-inflammatory microglia. And that can shut down that inflammation and kind of bring everything back to homeostasis. But if you don't do that, then those things just keep triggering each other. The microglia are freaking out and the neurons are freaking out, and they're just boinging off each other. And so if you can get in there with cannabinoids, which we know the CB2 receptors are on the microglia and the CB1 receptors are on the neurons, and we can hit both of those with cannabinoid molecules. So it's super exciting that I really do think that we have the potential to change a lot of things in concussion for sure with cannabinoid molecules.
Yeah. Amazing potential. I mean, because before all they had was just pain medications, giving them the injections in the spine and just workers' comp payments, and like, but it sounds like, you finally have a possible solution, something, and like you finally have like the ears of the NFL that they want to listen, that, that's amazing. This is amazing. And like some promise, giving these guys like some quality of life back. I mean, this is so amazing. I love hearing this, and you have, all this amazing information and, the science to back it up. And so is that also why you're doing this in Canada? Because like the United States isn't at that point where you can perform the studies that you need to bring them the science that they want and that they need?
Yeah, so it has to do with the scheduling. So in the United States, because cannabis is still Schedule 1, so it's considered a narcotic, you can't actually do any human clinical trials with a narcotic because it's a narcotic. So in the universities, they have even their anti-drug policies wouldn't allow you to actually do that on a university premises because it's they're federally funded institutions. And so it drives me crazy because everyone will say, we don't have human data. Well, the reason we don't have human data is because in the whole world, you guys haven't allowed us to get it. It's not because researchers haven't been trying to get it. We can't get through the hoops of the bureaucracy to try to get it done. And so Canada federally legalized cannabis in 2018. And so our research licenses are a little bit ahead of where the United States is. And so we're able to actually run the human clinical trial there because our universities will allow us to do so. And so my PhD is in, I'm double supervised by the Dean of Pharmacy and then also a concussion specialist. And so we have the research licenses that allow us to put cannabinoids into humans. And, you know, we have a ton of preclinical data, we have animal data, we have in silico data. Like, we know that the molecular mechanisms are there. The only place we're missing it is in humans, but we're only missing it because the policymakers won't let us do it. It's not because, and so I always say, like, the absence of proof is not proof of absence. Just because we haven't shown the data yet doesn't mean it's not happening. It's happening, but we need to be allowed to show that. And so we're doing the clinical trials in Canada because it was still a complete, it was a nightmare trying to get through the regulatory boards there to get our no objection letter, which is from Health Canada, which is the equivalent of the FDA. So we needed to have pharma grade, we still needed to have the investigational brochures and all the toxicology and everything on the substance that we were going to use because we are putting it in humans. So that was difficult to get, but we got it and we're going and we finished the first part. So the dose escalation part is complete and we're running the data now, which is super exciting because that's just at baseline. So that's just looking at what happens in a healthy athletic population as you increase the dose progressively to make sure, you have to have safety first, safety and toxicology first. And then from there, we're running the data to see if there were there changes, even just at baseline. Does it change the oscillation in your brain? Does it change the cerebral vascular flow? Does it change the concentration? And then the second part of the clinical trial is we're actually putting the formulation in football players in season. And it's a double-blind crossover placebo. So we'll be able to take the metrics and compare all of them between the athletes that are using the cannabinoid formulation and the athletes that aren't. And then we'll be able to show the difference in the two. And I think we'll probably be able to come out with some really good data because we're drawing so many different metrics because this is our one shot to show them what can happen. And so, we're doing all of the blood, we're drawing the blood consistently to look at the bioinflammatory markers and how those change when they're active in a season of football. So we can see, like we see in the soccer players, that's the one published piece of human data that we have. We saw that cannabis users didn't inflame in their brains the way that non-cannabis users did. And that study didn't even really have the specifics of what they were using, what cannabinoid it was. All we knew is those soccer players used some form of cannabis somewhat regularly, and their inflammation was less than the people that didn't. So now we'll actually have the specifics on the amount, and we will have the specifics on all the bioinflammatory markers, all the cerebral oxygenation changes. We're also looking at the autonomic nervous system changes. So we're looking at heart rate variability, which is a reflection of the brain. So your brain heart mechanisms are, because your heart is electric as well, right? And so it's all about electricity. So we're studying the heart rate variability changes because we know that the autonomic nervous system is heavily controlled by the endocannabinoid system. And so when you get a concussion, the autonomic nervous system dysfunction that happens is related to a lot of the symptoms that we see. And so by increasing the parasympathetic nervous system in your autonomic nervous system and reducing the sympathetic, we can pull them out of a concussion state faster. And we know cannabinoids, particularly CBG, is really good at that because it hits the alpha-2 adrenergic receptor, which increases the parasympathetic system. So totally key for, but the good news is we don't have a pharma grade anything. But the good news is if you're in a legal state or you're able to access it, you have it right at your fingertips in the plant. And with Megan's formulation, in my opinion, is awesome. I think it's got everything in there that you would want to have. And if I was able to have a magic wand and get through the FDA with everything we wanted to study, it would be something like that because, they hold us to the ability to prove every single molecule. And that's very difficult to get through a clinical trial when you have combinations of molecules. It is progressing in Canada now. There are some, we're able to mix some and coming out with data there. But you know what? You don't have to wait for that. If you're in a state where it's legal and you have access to the plant, and you can listen to Megan and contact different people, but you're able to access it if you want to. And I think that's super empowering for people to know that it's there for you.
Yeah. I think CBD and CBG are two of those cannabinoids that everybody should be incorporating into their daily routine every day, because they're non-psychoactive and they provide a lot of benefits. Neuroprotective, mood stimulating, they help your just body function, regularly, and they're just beneficial, and they're available nowadays in a lot of products that are available. So they're becoming more available. So it's good for everybody. And it's so exciting hearing about what you're working on. And I'm so glad Megan brought you on. This is just like the cherry on top of her already wonderful presentation. I had no idea that things were moving so fast. I mean, I knew that the NFL was like interested. And I think that those players are like the ones that could benefit the most, because I think that sport has the most contact in it, and that those players walk away with so much damage. They play for the shortest period of time. They have the least amount of games, and they get the most damage. Yeah. So I feel, thank you so much for doing that work.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. Great job, Megan. Thanks so much for your presentation.
Thanks for sharing.
Oh yeah. Thanks for all the work you do, you guys. Both of you guys are awesome. I'm a big fan of both of yours.
Thank you. And I think there's like one question that is somewhat related to that. Do you know, or can you say, is there a dose range of the CBD that you guys are using as part of your study?
Yeah. So, so in our dose escalation, I don't know if that's working. Yeah. In our dose escalation study, we started, we got them all the way up to 3,000 milligrams a day, actually. So we went really high to see, because there's, of course, a big argument in the industry over low dose, high dose, and I personally think every person, like we know even from epileptic patients that we work with, every person is so different in the amount that they need of cannabinoids that it's really hard to come up with. And we had so many like roundtables about I'm like, well, how are you going to calculate what's an optimal dose? I mean, come on, because an optimal dose for one person may not be the same optimal dose as the other person. And so in order to come up with it, we have a lot of different metrics and a logarithm that we're going to run with to come up with the optimal dose based on a lot of the different metrics that we see. But we did push it all the way up to 3,000 milligrams a day because we wanted to, it was high. At first I was like, I don't know, that's getting pretty high. But you know what? I have to say, I can't really say much about the data yet because we haven't published it, but you will be super impressed at how safe 3,000 milligrams of CBD actually is. Like, I was impressed. And so, it's just to make sure that we're able to see everything, because, there's been a couple human trials that were actually really well designed, but they had such low amounts of CBD. And so when they didn't see much of an outcome, then you question, well, your dose was so low, so now it makes it look like it was of nil effect, but it's like, well, no, that could be a design flaw, right? Because it was such a low amount that you don't want to have a result saying that there wasn't any effect when actually the problem was that the amount was too low, right? Because then you don't want people to walk away and think, oh, well, it doesn't work. It's like, well, no, the devil's always in the details in clinical research. And for that one, I was like, well, it was too low, it was too low as an isolate. When you have a whole plant, of course, you can use a lot less and get better efficacy, which is the power of the whole plant combinations. Now, the problem again with clinical research is we're handcuffed to we have to have these investigational brochures for every single molecule that we're going to put in the formulation. And so we started just with the CBD isolate because we were able to have that brochure, and then we're doing additional formulations as we go forward with different combinations. But with the isolate, so just so that everybody's clear, that was an isolate, and isolates do need a lot higher of a dose to get, you would need significantly less if you were using a whole plant product, which is good because that's cheaper and you get a better outcome, right? You get all of the benefits of the entourage and everything. So that was an isolate, but it was very high. We got up to 3,000 milligrams. Yeah. And then now we'll calculate and we'll figure out per kg what looks like it would be optimal in an athletic population.
Very cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see when it's published. Yeah. Well, awesome. Do you have a little bit more information for us before we get to the slide, the questions?
I don't.
Awesome. Well, this is some information about how anybody that's watching can also get a hold of you, right, Megan?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Perfect.
Yep. Follow me on social media. I put out educational content all the time. And then there's our website, and we provide free nurse guidance if people are interested, in any of the things that we do.
Awesome. I love that picture too. Such a cool picture.
Gilbert's such a cool dude.
I love this. Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Megan. So we have just a couple questions. You have a couple minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So one of our viewers is asking us if you have any information about how cannabis or even like psilocybin, because I know that you work with that as well, can help support damage done to the brain. And it's not exactly related to concussions, but through alcohol use.
Yeah. I don't have information, but what I can say is that if the mechanisms are similar, that if the damage we're seeing is like the neuroinflammation that we're seeing, then cannabinoids and psilocybin can help with that. Yeah, and I don't know that I have anecdotal reports either, but if there are symptoms, the headaches, brain fog, fatigue, then we know that can help. But I wish I had more information. If the mechanism is the same, it would make sense that it should help.
Yeah, I'm racking my brain too for like resources or even like research that I have read or I could even point to. Unfortunately, I think that's like a gap that needs to be filled and further like explored, researched, and provide more into, because I think that is something definitely that could be benefit a lot of individuals. But again, I agree with you. If the mechanism is similar, that there could be a lot of benefit there. And I believe that a lot of people are probably using it for that already. But that's definitely a really good question. I get so many good questions. I'm like, that is a really good one. And then another person's asking if the information here that we've talked about today could translate to combat veterans. I know we recently just celebrated Veterans Day. So concussions, veterans, I would believe so. Traumatic brain injuries.
It makes sense that it would. Yeah, same thing with, people who like normal people like us who fall and hit our heads. It would make sense that would help. Or our elderly patients who fall and hit their head, the same mechanism. So it would make a lot of sense that it would help in the same way.
Yeah.
Any bowel issues with high doses of CBD? Yeah. Somebody asked bowel issues with those high doses of CBD.
And it probably depends on like what is the base that people are using too, like with whatever CBD product and how much they're using. Again, like if 3,000 milligrams, if it's not concentrated, and if they're having to take like a lot of dropperfuls, and if it's like an olive oil or whatever kind of oil that could cause bowel issues. So if you're using that dosage, you probably want to find something that's concentrated. And then think about like maybe what doesn't irritate your system if you are having to take, that large dosage. And everybody's different, is what I would think. Was that right? What advice would you give?
Yeah. And I know that research has shown that, the high CBD can cause. Oh my God. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Am I coming through?
Yes.
Okay. I was going to say, research does show that like high doses of CBD can lead to some GI distress. So I would not be surprised if those athletes had some GI distress with 3,000 milligrams. That is so much CBD. That is wild. Go ahead.
And then one of the questions I had is, do you have any standard dosing guidelines and timetables for when a person should administer CBD after initial impact? So after someone has had a concussion, like how quickly should somebody try to administer the CBD to get like the best, results? Like, should they try to give it to them like within an hour, within like 24 hours to get the best, results?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is, we have no research on this. I think, you know, Liz's research is going to be fruitful in terms of what that might show. I gave it to my son on the first day, like within a couple of hours. You know, the other thing to consider too is that like the body's inflammatory system does its thing for a reason. So do we want to inhibit the body's natural inflammatory response right away? And I don't have an answer. I mean, I'd like to give it as soon as possible, but I don't have an answer if that's harmful to give it sooner or wait a little bit. And I think it's going to be a long time before we have that answer. But that's a great question.
That's a good point, that you do want to allow the body to have a little bit of time to do its natural thing, and then maybe like bolster the body, you know, its natural system or defense with a little bit of CBD, you know, afterwards. That's a really good point. I'm glad that you brought that up because that is very true. But yeah, this has been such really good information. Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you, Megan. Is there anything else coming up in the future that that our viewers can follow you or join you for, Megan, if they want to learn more about your programs, or do you have any like lectures or speeches coming up that they can join you for?
Let's see here. I have one coming up next week that is specific to nurses. I don't have that link yet, but you can follow me. That one is just for nurses. And we are doing a study right now on CHS, cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, with Cody Peterson. So if people know people who are suffering from CHS, the link to that study is in our bio. We just ask people take 10 minutes to fill out that survey, and maybe we can come back and present our results. And yeah, then, you know, if people are interested in like kind of diving deep into medical cannabis, there's CanMed, which is in Puerto Rico next year. And that's where hopefully I'll be presenting our work on suppositories there. And that's a fantastic place for people to learn and connect to people like Bonnie Goldstein and Dustin Sulak, you know, in person in Puerto Rico. It's a fantastic conference. 10 out of 10 recommend.
Yeah. CanMed's wonderful. Cody Peterson is also wonderful. We have a webinar that we did also on CHS, cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, on here as well, that people can check out. It's very beneficial for a lot of people trying to figure out like what's going on. And I would love to have you guys both back on and like with some follow-up research. I think that'd be really helpful. Thank you so much for being on again, Nurse Megan. This has been wonderful. And thank you for bringing Liz for that follow-up information. And I encourage everybody to go to your website, the Trusted Canna Nurse, where you can get more information, more resources, and find out, because I know a lot of people will be watching this online, like later on, years to come, where you can find out like what's going on like more currently. I hope that this information has been beneficial to you and that you've enjoyed this presentation. And again, thank you to you and your whole team, and to everyone that's been watching for sharing this time with us. And again, thank you guys for this. And I hope that we were able to share some information that will help you all become better informed cannabis consumers. And this information that we shared will help you find relief. Until next time, I look forward to seeing you guys all. Take care and be well. See you guys next time.